All right, what is happening, guys? Got a new style of video for you today. We're going to be responding, reacting, commenting on this video from Carey Nieuwhof. I'm new to Carey, new to his work, new to his YouTube channel, but I've done some research on him just to kind of get familiar before making this video. Found this video just from scrolling around on YouTube and thought it was interesting, had some thoughts on it, some things I disagree with, some things I agree with, as well as some things that I am concerned about and that I think there could be a helpful warning that I could offer in light of. So Carey, as far as I can tell, he's into leadership development, church leadership development, as well as into giving help with church growth and church growth strategies. A lot of his content on his YouTube channel is about that. Here's the trends to chase with your church. Here's ways to grow your church. Here's things to do in 2025 that are new and trendy and hot, is kind of the gist. He seems like a really nice guy. I think on the boots on the ground level, we would disagree with kind of ministry philosophy. I'm more of like a gospel-centered, means of grace kind of guy in the Reform camp, obviously. And obviously he's, just from what I've learned about him, more, or historically has been more seeker-sensitive, attractional. He talks about that a little bit in this video. Seems like that's changed, which praise God for that. But I have some thoughts and comments on it. As you can see, the title of the video is "The Attractional Church Model is Failing." So let's talk about this. What I'll do is I'll hit play. We'll watch through a little bit of it. I'll pause and comment as we go. Really, the meat of what I want to get into is in the middle of the video. But before I start, again, seems like a nice guy. I will disagree with a few things. Try not to assume motives or anything like that. But I just want to respond to some of the things that he says because I think it could be helpful. So let's watch the first little bit.
It's that they're actually showing up
More
more
just a
in
tad.
church attendance. Isn't that people are leaving? It's that they're actually showing up more than ever. I mean, that's a real surprise, right? Like for decades, church leaders tried to make faith appealing, right? Coffee bars, cool bands, great speakers. And for a while, it worked. But something massive is shifting in real time right now. And most churches haven't caught up. No, you don't need to serve bad coffee and recruit off-key bands. But if you miss out on what's happening right now, you'll never reach the people you want to be reaching. So what's going on? Well, here's the shift.
Let's pause here. So kind of the gist of the video. Attractional models no longer working, and there's a new way to do things, something else that's appealing to the culture right now. And so you better shift your strategy, shift the way that you do church, shift the way that you handle your church services if you want to keep up. So kind of just from the outset, and I want to point this out as we go on, there's a bit of trend chasing in this. And I think that's important to realize, like, all right, what's hot? Let's do that. And that's kind of where my concerns start. But let's keep watching. There's some things here for the next few minutes that I agree with quite a bit.
20 years ago, people were not spiritually hungry like they are now. So
That's true.
attractional church, seeker-sensitive church arrives. You had to convince them, guys, you got to eat. Well, today, people are hungry, right? The culture's broken. And they've researched the diet you're offering. And now when they show up at your church, what do they want you to do? They want you to feed them. So in this video, I'm going to show you why attractional church worked actually quite well for a season, why a lot of it is now outdated, and finally, I'll share with you what you should be doing instead.
So we'll stop here, and then I'll skip past his cool little intro segment, which is genuinely cool. But so just a quick point of disagreement here. The idea that the attractional church model worked well for a while, and now it's out of date. I would argue, and again, I'm coming from a different camp, a different ministry philosophy, I would say that it never really worked, and that it was never really the right way to do ministry or to do church. I think that it worked in the sense that it drew crowds, that I think in God's grace there were probably a lot of converts that came through the style of doing church, but ultimately I think that there's a lot of bad fruit that came from the attractional church model and the seeker-sensitive church model, namely in the fact that it really taught Christians to come to church as consumers and to come to church for what they can get that there's going to be entertainment, that there's going to be a service given to them. And I think that there's just a lot of just generally bad fruit that's came from the seeker-sensitive model. I think it was never successful, not in the way that it was intended to be. I do genuinely think that those who kind of pioneered that model did it in order to reach people, and I think that's good, and that's a good goal. But the means that we use to get to the end matter, and so I think he's wrong to say that that it did work for a time. I don't think it ever was the right way. I think it worked in a pragmatic sense in that it drew people in, but not in the sense of accomplishing what biblical ministry ought to be. But let's move on just a little bit. Let me skip ahead, and we'll keep watching.
I actually think the Attractional church was a gift. I think it served a purpose for a season. It was necessary. It was a cultural moment that was different than the moment we're in 20 years ago. God used it. But starting about a decade...
And I agree, God did use it, but because God works in something that is less than good doesn't necessarily justify using that thing. But I will also say, just to define terms, an attractional church or a seeker-sensitive church is a model of doing ministry, a philosophy of doing church that aims at appealing to those seeking spirituality, seeking God, things like that I'm going to do things in my service to, or in my church, to draw people in. So it kind of changes the Great Commission from go and tell to come and hear, or come and see. And so I find that to be not a good model, not a biblical model for doing ministry. It inverts the Great Commission, and it's trying to win people with entertainment and all that. That's just kind of the gist of what an attractional seeker-sensitive model is. It's how can we get people to come to us to get in the door, and what can we use to kind of draw them, to attract them, to appeal to them in kind of a consumeristic business consumer kind of mentality. So that's what the attractional church model is. Let's keep going.
Decade ago, things started to change. Change number one, the foyer moved.
I agree with this.
So what happened about a decade ago is the internet changed everything. You got a few things that came together at once. Number one, broadband. Number two, mobile first. Number three, everybody with smartphones. Okay. So what happened was, like 25 years ago, if you wanted to explore Christianity, you had to actually show up at a church, right? A friend had to invite you, or you had to subscribe to the cassette tape ministry, which nobody really did. But then with the advent of broadband internet, mobile, Wi-Fi everywhere, by the time you get into the 20-teens, you start to see people exploring spirituality on its own. So what happened was the foyer moved from Sunday being a first-time experience to, no, my first-time experience is right here on my phone, on my device. By the way, that's my wife. Okay, she's amazing. Anyway, so Sunday was a first-time experience, and now it's like, no, your phone is your first-time experience. So 15 years ago, people came in cold. Today, they come in warm, they come in ready, they come in researched, and they are ready to learn. They know what they're getting into. Then there was a second.
All right, totally agree with this. I think that he is on the money here. That shift has happened in the age of social media, smartphone, short-form video, especially YouTube. Things have changed. First point of contact is going to be typically online, and so having an online presence, having online ministry, putting your teaching, your sermons on the internet matters. It's helpful. In fact, just this past Sunday, literally, this happened Sunday for me. We had a visitor who came in. They found us online on a Reformed church map. They came in after having watched a teaching that I did on the relationship between the law and the gospel, which is actually going to go up on the channel Monday. In an adapted form, found this video, watched it, got a taste for what the doctrine was like, liked it, then came in, and even, as we talked about this after service, said, hey, this was one of the reasons that I was drawn in, because I like the theology, I agree with the theology. So he's right. The foyer has moved. I think that's a good way to put it. The new entry point to church is online, so it matters to do online ministry. It matters that your church has an internet presence as far as like getting the sermons, doctrinal statements, teachings on the internet. That is super important. We need to be mindful of that. We live in a new age. This is a good way that we can contextualize to get the gospel out there, but also to disciple and reach Christians beyond the scope of even our church building. So totally agree here. Let's keep going.
Second change. People opened up spiritually. People, you can see the data on this from Barna and other groups, Pew Research, etc. People are more spiritually open than they have been in a generation. So
That's
a
right.
generation ago, 20, 25 years ago, it was the era of Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, right? And they were the new atheists, and new atheism was on the rise and everything. And people were deeply suspicious of Christianity. We got into deconversion, and it was becoming very, very secular. Well, you fast forward to today, and Gen Z teens and millennials are leading the way, with 74% being highly spiritually open. In fact, even 66% of Gen Z adults say they are spiritually open. There's something changing in the culture, and people are going, no, we're actually really open, and the new atheism is on the decline. And
We'll stop here, and then I'll skip ahead. So he's absolutely right here as well. The stats don't lie. Millennials, Gen Z, increased renewed interest in spirituality, Christianity seemingly particularly. And this is huge. This is important. Pastors, ministry leaders need to be mindful of this. There's a hunger, and so the fields are ripe for harvest, and we need to be reaching the younger generations. The way we reach younger generations is through the right means of gospel ministry, right administration of the sacraments, preaching the word, being evangelistic, all these different things. He's absolutely right. There is a hunger. In fact, I was at Target just the other day, and I found this in the checkout line. I don't know if you can see that, but that's Life magazine has an issue out on Jesus, how his lessons, miracles, and devotion changed the world. Very positive, not even a bad retelling about Jesus' life and some of his miracles and ministry, from Life magazine, right? For sale in a Target here in Brooklyn, New York. And so I think that's kind of in a just a small way indicative of like the interest in culture right now, in American culture right now, towards spirituality and religion. Even magazines, secular magazines, are leaning into the renewed interest that's going on in culture right now. So he's absolutely right. There's a renewed interest in Christianity, in religion, and spirituality right now. Fields are ripe for harvest, so we need to go out and harvest. Let's go forward just a little bit to his next point on turning to Jesus.
New Barna data shows that the number of U.S. adults who affirm that they've made a personal commitment to Jesus that is still important in their life today, and by the way, Barna's asked this question for 40 years, it's very orthodox, has rebounded from an all-time low of 54% to 66% today. That's a 12-point jump in 3 years. You see this in Unite Us, which is the college revival movement that's happening in baptisms. You see it in outpourings. You see it in churches. People are hungry, they're open, and they're turning to the church. And
they are.
People who have made that commitment.
Seeing this even Jesus, here in New York.
That's a 12-point jump in 3 years. It's crazy. There is a move going on right now, and we got to figure out what to do about that. Now,
so one comment there, I think that's an interesting point. I don't think we need to figure out what to do about that. We need to do what we've always done, which is just the right and biblical means of ministry. We need to do church in a biblical way. John Calvin defined the church as, or true church, as being where the word is rightly preached and the sacraments are rightly administered. On top of that, he also talks about church discipline being an important mark of a true church. That's what we do about this. We preach the word verse by verse rightly. We go through books of the Bible. We rightly administer the sacraments, and we practice church discipline, church membership. And in that, the church is grown, the body is edified. So we do, what do we do in light of this hunger, in light of this fact that people are turning to Jesus and wanting to stick with it? We do biblical ministry. We don't have to come up with something new. We don't have to come up with something novel. We rely on and lean on what is old. We will rely on right gospel ministry, the right ministry of the word. And so I don't think we have to figure that out. I don't know if he would disagree with what I just said. He probably wouldn't. But I just thought that was worth saying. Like, this isn't a mystery. We do what the Bible tells us to do in ministry, and watch as the church grows and believers are discipled and developed into stronger believers. And so, yeah, we had the answer to that question. Let's skip ahead just a little bit more, and I'll link this video down below my video so you can watch the full thing. I encourage you to do that. It is definitely worth listening to, and the points that I think he's right on the money about, he's really on the money about. So let's look at this section where he talks about how we respond to this. Let's skip ahead. Boop.
And see if you are seeing these trends at your church or not. So then the question.
Also, quick comment, in case you're looking at my shirt, it is not a Mets jersey or a Mets shirt. It is a Knicks shirt. So don't get that confused. I'm not a Mets fan. Just throwing that out there.
Becomes, well, what does all of this mean? If the attractional model is fading, if it's not carrying what it used to carry, if it doesn't need to do what it used to do, what is replacing it? Well, here's what leading churches are doing right now, and what you can start doing as early as this Sunday. So these changes mean that when people show up at your church, they're ready to go deeper, faster. So the first thing you can do is pray with boldness, okay? People don't want a polite God. They want a powerful one. They are ready when they show up. They're hungry. So you can pray in anticipation for your service. You can pray in your service. People are ready to go on a journey. So I would say start with prayer. Pray with boldness. Secondly, you can preach deeper, okay? Now, don't assume they'll be bored. Assume they're starving. Offer real spiritual practices, worship, fasting, prayer, maybe even confession, okay? And so what you want to do is you want to design your services, you want to think about your services when you're putting them together as an encounter, not as entertainment. I'm not saying you can't do like special songs or something like that, but it's not for entertainment purposes. You don't need to be driving a motorcycle on stage anymore. What you want is you want an encounter. You want to try to get into that liminal space, that very sacred space between heaven and earth where people have an encounter with the living God, with the Holy Spirit. Another thing you want to do is you want to cut the fluff, okay? You don't.
All right, we'll come back to cut the fluff here in a second. But I agree with what he's saying about what we should be doing in our church worship services. But this is where my concern kicks in. And again, my fear here is trend chasing, right? I think that it's possible, and I think this is important, and I want you to hear this and listen to this and think about this, right? There's certainly a renewed interest in Christianity and spirituality and going deep, a hunger for deepness, a hunger for historical rootedness in our churches, a hunger for those old spiritual practices like confession, like corporate prayer, like fasting, right? There is an interest and a drive for this. I think we see this in the fact that there's young men in droves moving to Eastern Orthodox churches. I think we see this in the fact that we see a lot of Protestants, low church Protestants moving to like Presbyterianism and Anglicanism, those denominations and traditions. So we see that there is a hunger for this, but, and again, here's the caution, it is possible to be deep and be historical rooted and be attractional. And I think this is a warning that we need as this is a growing thing in popularity, as there's growing interest in this. We can be deep and historically rooted and practice piety and, Christian historical practices like confession and corporate prayer in our worship service and make those things attractional, and if we're not careful. And I think that's a danger for two reasons. Jared Wilson, he's an author who writes on gospel-centered ministry and has written some books in response to the seeker-sensitive attractional model, talks about this idea that what you win people with is what you win people to, and that's one of the main dangers of the attractional church, that if I win them with entertainment, I've won them to entertainment, and if the entertainment goes away, then I've lost them from the church. But if I win them to Jesus and with Jesus, then that's a different story. And so it's possible, and I think that this, again, is an important warning. This is really why I wanted to make the video. If we win people with depth and historical practice, and that's the main foot that we're putting forward, we run the risk of winning people to those things, and those things becoming attractional. Instead of those things being an outpouring of right biblical ministry, of what we ought to be doing already, that ultimately get us to the ends of Jesus, protecting the gospel, glorifying Christ, building up the church. We can do these things in an attractional way. I think we should do these things. Don't get me wrong. I'm praising God for the fact that he's moving from attractional to seeker sensitive to this. But if we're not careful, again, we can do these things in a attractional, seeker sensitive way, and not because it's for the sake of the gospel, because it's for lifting up Christ, because it builds up the church. Kind of the second danger is that if we're switching to doing this because it's trendy, because it's in vogue with those outside of the church, then really all we're doing is we're trend chasing, but two, we're remaining attractional. We're just putting a different bait on the hook, right? We're swapping the bait of entertainment with the bait of depth, historical rootedness, things like that. We're staying attractional. It's just a new thing that we're drawing people in with. And then on top of that, if we're just chasing a new attractive trend to draw people in with these things, what we end up doing is, or what we'll end up doing is, whenever there's a new trend, we'll abandon this one and go for the new one. And so this will just be a fad because it was in vogue for a while. And I'm worried about that. I think that if we're not careful, we'll treat doing these things, which I do think we should do, in an attractional way, and it's just going to become the attractional church again with a new coat of paint. And I think that's dangerous. We want to do these things for the right reasons. We want to do these things for the sake of the gospel and the glory of God. But if we're not careful, again, I'm probably getting repetitive, we can do these things in an attractional way where we're trying to win people with these things, and the result is we're winning them to these things instead of winning them with Christ and winning them to Christ. And so I think that's a real danger. I think it's a danger that we could just trend chase and this change again here in a couple of years. I think it's a danger that we become more focused on, the aesthetic of it, the vibe of it, the popularity of it, than the ends, which is about Christ and his glory. And so this is my warning, and again, I'm probably being repetitive here, and I'm not trying to be repetitive, but this is the caution that I want to give, right? We're seeing this renewed interest in church history and rootedness and depth and taking Christianity serious and bringing back old practices, things of this nature. We should have been doing it already, I think, but we cannot lean into this just because it's popular. We've got to be careful not to make this just attractional church 2.0. And I think that's, again, a real danger. And I'm not, again, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that any of this is bad as far as like what he's saying that we should do. I think we should do these things. My church, we have a 2-hour service, 50 minutes of preaching, multiple corporate prayers, multiple scripture readings. Right, we've got the liturgy. There's that historicalness to it, that depth to our worship service. So I'm not saying don't do this. I do this. My friends in ministry, they do this, but it matters. The means and the end matter. The means and the end matter. It matters how we do things, why we do things, and why we do things to what end. That's important. And if we're not careful, we can just be a new attractional church that is just trying to draw people to look at the old aesthetic, look at the ancient vibe, look at the practices we're doing and the richness that we have, and we're trying to pull people in with that richness. And what we've done is we've replaced the attractional church playing basketball on stage, church at the movies, church at the drive-in kind of thing, with just a new coat of paint. So that's the danger. I think these things are good, but they need to be done for the right reason. I think that matters. But let's keep watching.
You don't need gimmicks anymore. Yeah, you don't want to be boring, but you want to maximize what's real. People are showing up, and it's kind of like they skipped a step saying, I've already been introduced. Can you take me to the real thing? Now, I've got a few things I want to share because you might jump into the deep end and lose everybody if you just follow what I've said so far. So there's some important caveats I want to share with you. But before you go, one big caution. There is a balance, okay? You want to immerse them, but you don't want to lose them. You're still reaching, hopefully, unchurched people, not just recycled Christians. So don't go so deep that people who don't know how to swim end up drowning, okay? There are elements of the attractional approach that remain valuable. So I want to share a few of those. First of all, You want to assume intelligence, but not.
All right, we'll stop here for the rest of the video. And again, I'll encourage you to go and watch it. He basically gives tips to provide balance of like, here's how you go deep, but here's also how you continue to appeal to those who are coming in who are not Christians. He specifically talks about avoiding gimmicks, creating quick on-ramps, avoiding Christian jargon, and what is the last one? Connecting struggles to spiritual truths. So just like talking about real life struggles. And there's a lot of good in what he says there, and a lot that's true that he says there. I would just say, as far as how that balance ought to go and ought to look, my opinion, and I think I heard this from someone from 9 Marks, might have been Jonathan Lehman, you treat unbelievers in your service as eavesdroppers. The service is not for them. It's not designed for them. It's not geared towards them. The Bible is very clear that the gathering, the weekly assembly, is for believers, for edifying the body, equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. So we equip when we come together, we go out and we reach, we evangelize. That's the flow that we get from church to mission in the New Testament. And so we treat unbelievers in the service as eavesdroppers, or as Sam Gamgee said, as those who are dropping eaves. So we don't want to gear our services. Yes, be mindful to them. Explain, you know, if you're going to talk about propitiation or sanctification or one of those big Bible words, yeah, give a definition. And that's kind of what he talks about. Like, yeah, we should be mindful to those in the service, but I would just caution, we don't want to cater, because biblically the worship service is not for them. It's for believers, and that matters that we do things biblically. But that's kind of where the video ends up going. So again, just to kind of rehash what I've said, my concern with this, and while I largely agree with him and largely agree that these things should be happening in our worship services, my concerns are that this is a trend, and that it's trend chasing, and that whenever it goes away, we'll just go on to the next trend and leave this behind. I'm not saying that's what Carey is doing. I don't know his heart. I hope that's not what he would do. But that is my fear, just kind of largely, that I see a lot of people kind of leaning into, like, let's do church in this way. Let's be more rooted. Let's do these Christian practices. Let's lean into going deep for the sake of, like, that's what people want, not for the sake of, like, this is the way that we should be done, that it should be done in the first place. So first kind of concern is that this is getting trendy. We don't need to do it because it's trendy. We need to do it because it's right. Second kind of concern is that we're just doing the attractional church again in a new way, where we're making depth, rootedness, liturgy, things like that, the new attraction that's replacing being entertaining, and that we're trying to appeal to people on those bases instead of with the gospel and with Jesus Christ. Those elements of the worship service, corporate prayer, confession, having a good liturgy, going deep in the service, have to be for the equipping of the believers and for pointing people and winning people to Christ. Those things in and of themselves, having a rich liturgy, are not the goal, right? It's not that we're doing those things just to win people. We're doing those things to win people to Christ. They're a means to an end. And so we have to be mindful of that. We have to be sure that that is our motive and that is our goal in this. We don't want to just make this a trend that we're hopping on because that's what's going to appeal to people. We want to bring people to Christ, and that be the reason that we do those things. So those are my warnings. Those are the things that I've kind of, and really this comes from, I've noticed this and been thinking about this before I saw this video, and that's kind of why I jumped on making a response video, even though he's posted this video and it's been out for like a month. I've noticed this. There's this leaning into the depth, the liturgy. There's a renewed interest in these things. And my fear is we're going to do it just because it's trendy, not because it's right, not because it's biblical. And we should be doing these things. So take that for what it will. We can be deep. We can be historically rooted. We can have a liturgy, and those things become attractional if we're not careful. We don't want those things to become attractional. We want those things to be means that flow out of a right understanding of biblical ministry, biblical ecclesiology, that get to the end of reaching people with the gospel, edifying the church, glorifying God. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the video. I don't know if you'll agree. I don't know if you'll disagree. Again, I'm not trying to assume motives with Carey. He seems like a nice guy. But I just have these fears, have these concerns about kind of this attitude towards depth, rootedness, that I hope we don't see kind of unfold into just an attractional church 2.0 kind of movement, where we're leaning into it just for the sake of this is what's attractive in culture right now. So those are my thoughts. If you disagree, if you agree, leave a comment down below. Like the video, subscribe if you're interested in this kind of content, and thanks.